So, welcome back. We're on chapter 17 of the positivity bias, and the chapter is called channeling. And the introduction to the chapter talks about he who is born under the mazel or the constellation of Mars will be a shedder of blood. And Rav Ashi observed that he could channel that aggression by becoming either a surgeon, a sheikhet who slaughters meat, or a mohel, someone who does circumcisions. That's the Gemara Shabbos, page 156, Daf Aleph. The idea then is that, a person could be born under a mazel that says that he has a tendency towards something, but how does he use that? That becomes the question. The story I like to talk about is a story from the books of Navi and book of Shmuel, when Shmuel Navi, when the Samuel the prophet was told by God to go to the house of Yishai, of Jesse, and find the next king from his sons. So Shmuel goes to the house of Yishai, and he says, line up your sons. And Yishai lines up his sons, and Shmuel starts with the oldest and stands in front of him, and the man is really impressive. But God tells Shmuel, nope, not that one. So he stands in front of the next one. God says, nope, not that one. Stands in front of the next one. And each one is like more impressive than the other. We got a really, good harvest of boys there, right? And he goes through all of them, and God says, nope, none of them. So Shmuel turns to Yishai and he says, you've got other sons. And Yishai said, the runt. The runt of the litter. He said, bring him in. So he calls in David. David is smaller. He's of a ruddy complexion, more of a gruff exterior. And when Shmuel sees him, Shmuel shudders because he sees Esav. Esav was Yaakov's brother who became a murderer. Esav was the one who he had to get the birthright away from because he was literally a murderer. And that's what Shmuel saw when he looked at David. He saw Esav. And God told the prophet, he said, but you don't know his heart. Yes, he'll shed blood, but he'll shed blood as korbanos, as sacrifices. He'll shed blood in the battles that God commands him to do so. And he won't be allowed to build a base in English because he shed blood, but all of those will be in God's honor. No moral injury here. These are all done in God's honor and God's word. So that's what the Gemara is talking about. It's what's the kavana? What's the direction you're taking this from? And the first story starts off with, this was during the 1950s, during the Cold War era. And there's a family that comes in for a yechidus with the Rebbe. And the young girl asks the Rebbe about atomic energy. Is that like good or is that bad? And the Rebbe said, how Jews answer a question with a question, right? So the Rebbe answers, he says, in your kitchen at home, there's a knife. Is the knife good or bad? And the girl says, well, it depends on what it's used for. If it's used to cut up food and prepare meals, it's good. But if it's used to hurt someone, then it's bad. And the Rebbe says, you're right. Absolutely true. And so it is with atomic energy. The atomic energy, the technology in and of itself is not bad. It's what you do with it that makes a difference, how you use that. And that's the same thing. And I think what's a fascinating piece about this is we talk about the Rebbe's positivity bias. The Rebbe is coming from a very deep place in Hasidus, in Kabbalah, where anything that God creates has a divine purpose. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here. It wouldn't be in creation. So it has to have a purpose. It has to have a divine purpose. The question then becomes, what do we do with it? And we talk about something which is permissible or something which is not permissible. The real question the Talmud is asking in that question is it something which is tied down and can't be elevated, or is it something which can be elevated? So when we talk about the arguments between Hillel and Shammai, Shammai is coming from that school of thought, from that perspective, that better not to take risks. And if that thing is questionable about elevating, let's just say it's not permissible. But Hillel is coming from the other side of elevating everything we possibly can. And sometimes there'll be some risks there, but let's try. Let's make it permissible and see if we can elevate it, right? And so the Rebbe is coming from that perspective of, if halachically it's permissible, it must have a holy purpose that they can be used for, and therefore it's a neutral instrument that can be potentially good. And there must always be this redemptive reward, almost always outweighs the regressive risks. In other words, the possibility that we can do good with this outweighs the fear of let's not even try, let's avoid it. And so with all of the technologies, and of course back then the great advancing technologies was radio and television and radar. That was the 50s, right? You know, that was the great advancing technologies. But I remember when satellites were coming in, and the Rebbe would conduct Fabringens broadcast over satellite. I was in Australia, early 1990s, and it was Hanukkah time. And we had all the kids out at camp, outside the city at a camp location. And the Rebbe decided that for Hanukkah, we should celebrate worldwide. And they were going to do a satellite hookup, which nowadays we do all the time. We're doing it right here on Zoom, right? But back then in 1990, this was cutting edge technology, right? And so we literally woke the kids up in the middle of the night, got them all in buses, drove back into town, into Sydney, so that we could be there in the hall, in the auditorium, live with the Rebbe back in Brooklyn, New York. And then that Hanukkah telecast was all over the world. It was literally all over the world. And they switched the cameras to a different location. And one of the kids would say another pasuk, and everyone would repeat after them. So we were literally learning Torah and sharing insights and hearing the Rebbe's discourse live internationally, but the feed was going back and forth between locations. And Sydney was on it as well. And this is the Rebbe's perspective, that this is new cutting edge technology. It can be used for good. It can be used for holy purposes.
You know, I wonder how he would feel about, if he was alive today, about how we conduct minions on Zoom. I know that hasn't been very popular in the Orthodox movement, but we do it in the conservative movement.
Yeah, and I think, as we said at the very beginning, it depends
about
on
as questionable. I have to say that myself, but
it all comes down to halacha, and there are halachas about how you do a minyan and what does it mean present for the minyan. You know, if you're on the other side of the mechitza, if you're outside the room, you know, does that count? If you're in the hallway outside the room, there's halachas about that. That then becomes a rabbinical obligation to figure out how do we apply it in this new environment, right?
What if you're across the country?
Superimposed upon laws of Eruv too, because you have two rooms with a small room and a larger room, and where's the majority at? That can affect how the minyan is counted too. There's a lot of halachas there.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So again, as long as it's within halacha, the Rebbe would be all for the use of the technology for positive, good purposes, right? It's interesting because I remember there used to be a program called Pagisha Im Chabad. an encounter with Chabad. Back in the 70s, when I was in college, so there were events where you could come for a weekend retreat to Lubavitch World Headquarters in Crown Heights and spend the weekend with Chabad, and including Shabbos and the Rebbe's Shul. And usually there would be a Fabrengen, a gathering in Shul on Shabbos as well, and the Rebbe would speak. And it was a whole weekend event. One of the people who put that together, who was very actively involved in that, is Dr. Yaakov Chanukah. Dr. Chanukah had actually taken, before this time, he had taken a break for a year. He took a sabbatical break from university, from his PhD studies, to sit in yeshiva. He went to yeshiva and he sat for a year in yeshiva just learning Torah. Towards the end of his year, he'd fallen in love with it, and he decided that he's going to stay in yeshiva. In his private audience with the Rebbe, he shared with the Rebbe his plans, and the Rebbe said, you should go back and get your PhD. And Dr. Chanukah had said, but like, I want to be a campus rabbi. I want to get out there and be a part of this movement of teaching Torah to the masses and bringing people back to Torah mitzvahs through their education. And that was his passion, right? The Rebbe smiled and he said, you will accomplish more towards that goal with a couple of initials behind your name. So the Rebbe was very much aware of the psychology, the social psychology of titles and brands and packaging. And he knew that whatever Dr. Chanukah was going to be able to teach and share, it would be received higher with a PhD behind him. And so even if he said the same thing, nowadays we have another term for that. It's called street credit, right?
Called what?
Street credit.
Oh, yeah, street credit. Street credit.
Right? Street credit, or I think the vernacular is street cred.
Cred.
Right?
Yeah.
Just cred. Yeah.
Just cred. Okay. So the idea then is,
I prefer the PhD.
but again, the psychology behind it is it opens someone's mind. They're more willing to listen, either because you have street credit or because you got a PhD. You've got something that tells me I can listen to this guy. He knows.
There's a lot to be said for your long beard. No kidding. No kidding. Around the world, beards indicate the elders.
You know what
Well, that's what the name is in Hebrew.
I was once taught that the international sign language for Jew is beard.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So you're right. That plays very much into this whole kind of concept of how we're going to receive, how we're going to perceive the information, right? There was another example. In Jewish law, in halacha, we talk about, in Hasidus, we talk about humility as being a huge piece of Hasidic life. And, which all comes back to containing the ego, controlling our ego a little bit and bringing it down, right? So the more you're into publicizing yourself, the more ego that gets involved, then the more you are in danger for your soul, because it's all about you and not about God, right? So humility is a major piece of Hasidic doctrine. And in fact, in halacha, the Rambam Maimonides, when he talks about giving tzedakah, he even puts a series of how do you give tzedakah? The highest level and the lowest levels of giving tzedakah. The highest level of tzedakah is that when the guy who gives has no idea who it's going to, and the person who receives has no idea where it came from. He can't expect anyone to acknowledge him for giving And he doesn't feel indebted to anybody because he doesn't know where it came from. Right? And that's the highest level of tzedakah because it comes with the greatest level of humility. Right? So humility is a really big thing. So there was someone who came to the Rebbe who was talking about, donating the wing of a new hospital or some big thing, right? And they were talking about putting his name on it. And he was very much against this because it didn't help his humility, right? It would just go towards building his ego. And he really didn't want to be part of this. And so he was questioning whether or not he would even donate it, right? And the Rebbe was saying, flip this around. Flip this around. It's about Maisahu ha'ikr. The action is the main thing. If you do this with anonymity, the building gets built. If you do it with your name on it and others see your name on it, they can feel, oh, I know him. Oh, he did this. Well, I could do this. And it might encourage other people to turn around and step up in a big way because they saw you do so. So the little action is doing this on your own. The bigger action is allowing your name to be put in lights, so to speak, in order to encourage other people to step up to the plate. So it comes back down to the bottom line. There's an old Hasidic story, and I don't remember the names. I'm sorry about not remembering the names here, but there was a rule that when you came to the Alter Rebbe to visit and you learned Hasidus, then on your way home, as you stop in villages on your way home, you have to repeat over what you learned. And there was a chassid who was really good at this. He was a really good chayzer, able to give over what he'd learned really well, and it engaged people, and they appreciated it, and they applauded him, and it fed his ego. And the next time he was visiting the Rebbe, he asked for permission to be let off the hook from this obligation of publicizing what he learned because it's damaging his ego. And the story goes that the Rebbe's response was, you can stink like an onion, but you have to give over. Meaning that your ego is your problem and you need to work on that. But no one else should suffer and not get to hear Hasidus because you got a problem with your ego. So we got to step up. We got to step up, right? And stepping up is the idea. Also comes back to the idea of being able to get over ourselves. To be able to get over ourselves in all these different things. Yeah. Don't stink like an onion, right?
No. And it's also Pirkei Avot, and also I've seen in some of the mimers from the Rebbe is Meod Havei Shval Ruach, be exceedingly humble in spirit.
Humble of spirit.
Yes.
Right.
Havei Shval Ruach, humble in spirit. Yeah.
And the opposite of that is don't smell like an onion. Your ego is your problem. You need to deal with that, right? Yep, absolutely. And I think there was one time, there's a quote here that Rebbe mentioned to someone, that his ego was being affected by his charitable things. And the Rebbe said, though your charitable donation may lack sincerity, I can assure you the poor man eats with sincerity. So again, it comes down to mission, right? Mission orientation. What's the mission? Get the person food. How that has to happen? You have to do the best you can, right? But again, Rebbe oftentimes turns our perspective towards a positive view on things, right? Time and time again, the Rebbe turns our perspective to a positive thing. Here it talks about
fenders moving. Sorry.
So self-centeredness is a really bad rap, right? It's about ego, right? Well, where do we see that most blatant? We typically see that with kids. Kids are all about themselves because they're beginning their exploration into the world, and it begins with self-exploration and self, and they see everything from their own eyes, from their own perspective of things, and that's how they see things, right? So this idea of self-centeredness really is critical to personal development. And so we have to use that self-centeredness in a positive way, right? To see about ourselves and understand ourselves and see how we fit into the bigger picture. If we push humility too far, then you become a shmata. You become useless, right? Our character development class in my squadron this week was all about humility. And we were talking about this very idea that too much humility is a bad thing, because then you lose self-confidence and you get nothing done. And I was bringing out the idea that that's not too much that's not too much humility, because humility itself is a good thing. That's not humility. That is a lack of self-esteem. That's a negative thing. One has to know, Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam, the world was created for my sake. Now, one could see that that's a negative thing, because that's an ego thing. The world was created for my sake. But there's two parts to that. There's two sides to that blade, right? One is that I need to know that the world's creation is for my sake, meaning that I have an obligation for the continuation of the world. We are important. We are critically important. Our existence, the universe depends on our existence, because otherwise we wouldn't be here. God made us for a purpose. And so the fact that we do matter, that self-centeredness helps us understand we do matter. We are critical to the universe. God's mission can't be completed without our involvement. There's something we're supposed to do here. We have to know that. Now, we have to know that with humility, that my mission here, that I exist for a purpose, that the purpose is not me. So that part is very critical, very important. To be able to know that we are very important in the point of creation, and we exist for a reason, but at the same time, we are not the reason in and of itself. So again, the Rebbe has taken the idea of each of these categories and said, let's look at the positive side of that. So humility has its thing, but self-centeredness is critical. You have to know your value, the balance between these things, but we focus on the positive parts of the things. So which means there's got to take a lot of introspection. A lot of introspection. Sometimes we get caught up in the negative aspect of introspection, of being critical of ourselves. And we need to think the positive side of things as well. And one of the measuring sticks that the Alter Rebbe talks about, the author of the Tanya talks about, is the difference between atzvus and merirus. Atzvus is like a sadness, a disappointment. Merirus is a bitterness. And the distinction comes down to where they go. He writes here in the book on page 231, sadness is a feeling that depletes the person's energy and leaves them feeling progressively lower and increasingly lost. That's the sadness or non-clinical depression. Atzvus. Merirus, on the other hand, it has a bite. It has a sting. And it stimulates a person into action. It concentrates pain, its concentrated pain presents us with a direction forward. So when we're feeling that atzvus or merirus, how do you know the difference? Is it taking you down or is it pushing you on? Does it make you give up or does it make you get something done? Fix this, right? And that's a difference. By giving ourselves time and space to deeply feel sadness or losses, we can then concentrate the essence of that feeling towards potential growth and inspiration in our lives and in the lives of others, but for the good. For the good.
It depends how you react.
Yes.
You know, my parents were Holocaust survivors, and I could tell you, I've seen a whole spectrum of people, survivors. It depends how they react confronted to the same scenario, from bitterness to forgiveness, and depends, you know, how they were affected.
Yeah. And that's, we talk back again, that story from Viktor Frankl or from Edith Eger, you know, between stimulus and response, there's a choice. And the Alter Rebbe is saying, atzvus or merirus? Does it take you down or does it push you to do something? And even in the doing something, what do you do?
He makes a key point with the time and space. I don't think you can be useful when you've become bitter unless you've given yourself some time to digest and see how you can improve or you know, use it to your benefit, or you know, I mean, it takes that what am I looking for this introspective, I think.
Yeah. I had an airman who called me. Won't mention any names here on the recording, but I had an airman who called me who had been, what's the term again now? Held back? No, rolled back. Rolled back to repeat training. And he'd been trained in positivity, right? So the first part of the conversation we had was the focus on this will be good, this will be good, this will be good. We'll get this out of it, we'll get this out of it, we'll get this out of it. And so intellectually, he was processing, okay, we're going to find the positive, we're going to look at the good, we're going to stay focused on positive. And he did all that for the first half hour of the conversation. And then there was this pause. And I asked the question, how are you going to mourn your loss? And that's when the tears came and he was able to cry, and he needed the time to process the emotion. We can stay focused on positive, 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 but you still need time to process the loss and feel it fully.
Sometimes we're very focused on a goal, and if it doesn't happen quick enough, it can be a problem at first.
Yeah.
But then you may just concentrate on getting to that goal later on. And
I've heard folks say that you have to have time for your pity party, but then move on.
Yeah.
Have yourself your pity party, then step out of it and move up. But yeah, that has to happen. You have to know there has to be time for mourning the loss. So we're finishing up here, and we're coming back to this idea.
You know, you forgot one of my favorite expressions in this chapter. If not you, who? If not now, when? I just love Hillel with certain quotes. Passed over it.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to focus on moving forward. And now is the time. We're here. It's now. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah. If not now, when? I just love all that. I can't believe a guy 2,000 years ago thought like that.
Oh, yeah. Nothing new under the sun. That's what's from King Solomon, right? Nothing new under the sun. So finishing up on this chapter, it says, channeling popular culture and new technologies. And we're using the quote here, that everything God created in his world, he created to express his glory. So if it exists in this world, it's here to express God's glory. And that approach, based on the firm belief that everything in creation has a divine spark waiting to be released and reconnected to its source. Everything has its purpose. There is no darkness that does not harbor the potential for light. So, again, going back to that story we just shared about the Hanukkah, having the Hanukkah celebration worldwide by using the newest technologies. That was back in early 1990s. Here we are, 2021 at the end, and everyone is familiar with Zoom technologies and internet meeting technologies, Microsoft tech, all of this stuff to be able to have meetings, virtual meetings from around the world, to share Torah and mitzvahs, and just like we are doing today. And the idea is that we should use all those things that are available to us to increase holiness and acts of goodness and kindness. Any thoughts to sum up our discussion today?
Yeah, it's actually a silver lining to COVID-19.
Yeah. Not taking away from all the negative impact, but there is positive. It's forced us to expand.
Not to
And
mention, we wouldn't even have these vaccines had not the manufacturers decided to share information. So imagine what the world can be like if we shared the information.
yeah, absolutely. I think it's an amazing insight is that the world is learning to and knows how to communicate and get things done in a way we unprecedented in the past. No vaccine, I think, ever got created and moved forward this fast. But again, it was the teamwork. That's a beautiful thing. Zev, any thoughts?
No. It's cool, good stuff.
Good stuff.
I guess we work better as a minion.
Very good.
In person.
In person. Yes, in person is great.
All right, so next week, are we still being recorded? Yes.